me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Give me a light to light my way. Truth is the light, so wise men say. Hooray! Good job, everybody. This week's reading is The Redeeming Light. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The book of Isaiah in the Bible tells us, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. What is this light of which so many scriptures speak? In Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramhansa Yogananda, by Paramhansa Yogananda, we read of an early experience the Master had with that light. I was blessed about the age of 8 with a wonderful healing through the photograph of Lahiri Mahashaya. This experience gave intensification to my divine love. While at our family estate in Ichapur, Bengal, I was stricken with Asiatic cholera. My life was despaired of. The doctors could do nothing. At my bedside, Mother frantically motioned me to look at Lahiri Mahashaya's picture on the wall above my head. Bow to him mentally. She knew I was too feeble even to lift my hands in salutation. If you really show your devotion and inwardly kneel before him, your life will be spared. I gazed at his photograph and saw there a blinding light enveloping my body and the entire room. My nausea and other uncontrollable symptoms disappeared. I was well. At once I felt strong enough to bend over and touch Mother's feet in appreciation for her immeasurable faith in her Guru. Mother pressed her head repeatedly against the little picture. O omnipresent Master, I thank thee that thy light hath healed my son. I realized that she too had witnessed the luminous blaze through which I had instantly recovered from a usually fatal disease. Where my light is, God once told a saint whom the divine light had healed, no darkness can dwell. The divine light, pure, calm, liberating, is the only final cure for every kind of delusion, ill health, emotional grief, and spiritual ignorance. Seek it daily in the silence of deep meditation. As the Bhagavad Gita says, for whom that darkness of the soul is chased by light, splendid and clear shines manifest the truth, as if a sun of wisdom sprang to shed its beams of light. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. As Dharmadas, I believe, mentioned, we just got home last night from Spiritual Renewal Week at Ananda Village, which is really the highlight of the year. And it was a very full week with hundreds of participants and many evening programs as well as daily lectures by panels of speakers. So it was incredible and a little overwhelming in some ways. And I had an experience that I want to share with you. It was sort of a chastisement from the universe to me. But what happened was Dharmadas had a morning class that he was part of, and then the two of us were teaching an afternoon class. And I had not had a chance to really prepare for my part of that afternoon class. So I decided to skip one of the evening programs because I needed to be centered, quiet, and prepare, have everything written out, what I thought I should do. And so there was this evening program, and Dharmadas headed off for it, and I said, "Aren't you going to study for the class?" And he said, "No, it'll be inspiring tonight. It'll give me the inspiration that I need for the class." And I sort of went, well, I'm going to prepare. And so I did. And where we were staying had a little balcony outside, right outside our room, very private. And so I went out there. The evening was lovely, it was starting to cool down and beautiful view. And so in my bare feet, I just propped my feet up on a chair and I had all my books there and I started reading. There was a buzzing sound and I looked up and there were several wasps just sort of buzzing through the atmosphere. And I didn't think anything of it because I get along with insects. They don't normally bother me. And I don't have a phobia or anything about them. So I wasn't moving and I didn't think they would bother me. When suddenly they attacked. 5 of them got me before I could jump up, papers flying everywhere, and bat them out of the way and escape into the room. And I was in intense pain. 3 of them got me on the foot. And so my foot just swelled up. And I'm frantically looking on the internet, what do you do for a wasp sting? And they said, ice and elevate it. So how do you put ice from an ice cube and elevate your foot at the same time? It was very comical. So for an hour and a half, the length of the evening program, I was dealing with wasp stings. And I thought, I guess I made the wrong choice. Why didn't I go for the inspiration? Then, of course, everyone for the whole rest of the week were telling me, oh my gosh, that program was just unbelievable. And so this is a great instance of your karma coming to you. It was my karma to get stung, coming at a time that taught me a lesson. And so when we get stung by karma, as we inevitably do in this life, look to what the lesson is. Swami was very strong about saying that karma is not to be feared, it's not to be anticipated as this horrible thing that we have to work through. What karma is a guiding energy. Just like with the wasp stings, it was saying, don't think about yourself and don't try to be mind-born with what you're trying to do, as I was wanting to write down every important point about my class. Go with the flow of inspiration. lift your consciousness. Be in tune with the flow of divine grace, the flow of divine energy. And God will give you the right thing to say in your class, or in our case, generally, that karma will guide you. No, don't put your hand on the hot stove. That doesn't feel good. You know, respect the distance of that heat. Do the right thing. In my case, go to the program. Be uplifted in consciousness, and then give that to people. So don't be afraid of karma. Just think of it as a loving hand guiding you. And interestingly, as soon as the program was over, that hour and a half, the pain was gone. Important lesson. The other story that I can tell on myself is we have to dissolve the ego. That's the main thing that we have to do on the spiritual path. Two things: dissolve the ego and realize that God is the doer. Well, we were in India, and I like to think of it this way, that as an American, I had no clue about living in India. I had lived in Europe for a year and a half starting our Italy center, but and when Swami decided we were on pilgrimage, and I led the choir tour of the Holy Land. This was in '85. And we had a beautiful choir, sang all in every pilgrimage site in the Holy Land. Then we went to Assisi and visited the shrines of St. Francis, sang in all those places too. And then at the end of that tour, Swami said, "Nirmala, I want you to stay in Italy and, work with the music here in Italy." And I didn't want to. It was like a foreign country. I didn't speak the language. It was all new to me. I was like, ah! So he's at the airport. I'm seeing him off on the plane with all these other people, and I'm crying like this. And he looks at me and says, "Nirmala, Italy is a civilized country. What is your problem?" So anyway, I lived through that and learned a lot about myself. And then some years later, a decade later or so, we went to India. Well, a lot of people speak English in India, so that was a help. But it was overwhelming, a sensory overload. Not being able to drive. I tried driving one time, and I decided, I don't think so. So there was like no freedom, and just a difficult thing for me. I was used to getting things done in an American way. Indians have their own culture. They get things done in a very different way. And in some ways, it's a whole lot better than what we try to do here. So what happened was that we ended up buying this land, and the fellow in charge of putting in the road made a great American road, straight, like this. And so I was appalled that it didn't curve and make a beautiful sort of S through the countryside instead of just being this clunky, straight, ugly road. So this is so indicative of my beginning energy in India. I got out there and tried to change the course of the road. Now, it sounds funny now, but I was totally into it. I can do this, I told myself. And I had the pickaxe and I had the shovel and I was out there moving the rocks. I was sure that if I could just curve it a little bit, soften the edges, it would work. I was out there for hours and I almost died. I was so exhausted and I realized India had won. I just was not equal to it. Now, I tell you that story because that's the ego. We think we know everything. We think we know who we are, everything about ourselves. We think we know the way to work in the world. We think we know what's best. You know, your opinion is fine as long as it agrees with my opinion. And that is the ego. But what we have to realize is that we're just a little speck. I was just a little ant out there trying to change the road. I didn't have the power. None of us have the power. God has the power. When we attune our will to God's will, then we can accomplish anything, everything. We can move mountains. I was so impressed being at Ananda Village at how beautiful everything is. And I remember, you know, I have my 50th anniversary this summer on August 9th, 50 years of being at Ananda. And I can tell you that in the beginning, it was pretty rough. I was telling someone about one of the houses, quote unquote, that I stayed in. It was built by one of the monks, and he had built it just tall enough that he could energize and just long enough that he could do savasana, you know, the corpse pose, yoga posture, to lying flat on his back on the floor, and just wide enough that he could sleep. The only problem when I inherited this little cabin was that he was shorter than I was. And so I had to sleep curled up on the side. And I remember that before I'd put my feet on the floor in the morning, I had to make sure there were no beetles down there. Didn't want to squash any beetles. And I did have a wood stove in there. Jeannie and Vidura put in a wood stove for me. And Swami wanted to see it one time. And so he came down the hill and was appalled. He called it a hovel. And so ever after, I called it Rivo Torto, which is what St. Francis called his hovel with his monks. Anyway, the good part about that little place that I stayed was that it was very near Swami's house, and I was working for him at the time, so he could stand out on his porch and call my name, and I could talk to him. Anyway, I don't remember why I was telling you that story. But I have fond memories of what Ananda was like 50 years ago. That was the point. So now it's incredibly beautiful. And why is it beautiful? It's not because there was constant harmony. It's because people cooperated. They put aside their own egos and what they thought was absolutely right, and they listened, and they worked together. It's so essential to the spiritual path that we dissolve the ego and not think that we are always right and that we always know what the right thing is. together we find the truth. And so I'll just end by urging all of us to realize, to meditate on this idea of God's redeeming light. The more that we can let go of selfish desires and work towards higher consciousness, just like I have learned now to go where there's inspiration and not be locked in myself. That's what we need to do. There's a saying by Lahiri Mahashaya. He's advising a devotee through a letter, and we have some of his letters. And he's saying to the devotee, when you're meditating, doing kriya-yoga, don't think. Don't let your mind wander. Just focus on what you're doing with devotion. Devotion is the most important thing. At the beautiful dinner Indian banquet last night, it was just amazing. And Morally, who is a devotee from India, he lives in Seattle, told a story that was just absolutely thrilling. I hope all of you can get the recording of that and listen to the beautiful story that he gave. But in that story, the heroine, Shabari, sees her guru for the first time, and she is completely transformed. She fixes her gaze always on the guru, serving the guru. And she finds happiness and she finds God through that service. Because it's not as though she's a servant. It's not as though service is demeaning. It's that service is liberating because it's love. And that love and service will take us to God. In fact, in Morley's story, he was saying, listing out all these other things, wisdom, power, light, all these different things. Are they going to get you to God? The first and most important thing is service and devotion. Devoted service. And that is what gets you to God. So let's go deep into that thought.
I had an experience of the divine light when I was about 17 years old or so, give or take, and I was practicing. I didn't know how to meditate. I was just sort of exploring spirituality, but I had learned a certain technique that related to going to sleep in a certain way, and I practiced it, and I had this experience once of seeing the divine light in a way. I think I was actually seeing the light of the chakras because it was colorful. It wasn't just sort of brilliant sun. It was like red and just different colors, but it was orders of magnitude more intense than any light in this world. And it was pretty shocking, I have to say. I mean, at that age, and I didn't have any other preparation for that. It wasn't like I came from a tradition that talked about, okay, you do this and this and this, and you'll have certain experiences and so on. It was like or anybody sort of watching or guiding any of this process. It was just, well, I read something in a book and I tried it, and lo and behold, after a month or two of fiddling around with it, boom, I had this experience, and it was like, whoa, okay. And I remember sort of hollering out, this prayer, and then it stopped instantly. It was like it just ended. Okay. But what I realized is that spiritual experiences can take us by surprise. Usually it's a little more peaceful, a little more uplifting. It's not generally alarming. But I had another experience once practicing a yoga posture and feeling this, I suppose, a little burst of Kundalini. And again, it was like, what little jolt. And I remember telling Prakash, I was at Ananda by this point, telling Prakash, and he sort of chuckled. It was just very sweet. He said, I used to have that sort of thing happen to me when I would sit for meditation. I would sit cross-legged. And every so often when I finished the meditation, I would find that I was at a different place in the room, like I had levitated there, or it was just a little burst of Kundalini. It might move you to someplace else in the room. I was like, oh, I never had that experience before. But these experiences come when we're ready for them on a certain level. We may not, or we may think we're not ready, as when I was 17. But they come in a certain kind of way. And we learned something about this week, which I thought was very interesting. And unfortunately, I can't repeat all the Sanskrit. So this was a part of a class that Morley gave. And he used some of the Sanskrit terminology, but I can at least explain it in English. He was saying that we can practice technique and achieve results just from the practice of the technique. It's just that it has a limit. And Swami described this limit, and I'll explain what Swami said in a moment, but the way Morley described it was, it awakens energy in us, and that energy starts to rise, and we feel the result of it, and it feels wonderful. It feels peaceful, loving, the heart starts to open up. Energy rising produces joy. It's just natural. It's how we're constructed. However, without devotion, as Nirmala was pointing out, it hits a barrier, a natural barrier, and that barrier is at the medulla. And the medulla doesn't want to process more than it's capable of, sending forward to the point between the eyebrows. And if it clamps down and says this much and no more, and there is more, then what happens is the energy just goes back down. Now, Swami described this in a different way. He said, you can practice certain Kundalini exercises, for example, or certain spiritual practices. Some of them are very, very intense. They're like kind of freaky intense. But he said, and you can have spiritual experiences. But what happens is, if you don't have the devotion to support them, is the way he phrased it, which is to say that there isn't enough flow completely offered to the divine beyond the ego, then what happens is you rise quickly and you fall quickly. And we see it. We've seen it in other, in this tradition and in other traditions. People have these amazing experiences. They experience a kind of enlightenment. Sometimes people have this experience through drugs. They take something psychedelic or hallucinogenic in some way. They have this cosmic experience, and it's like, whoa, I am one with the universe. It's like, wow, this is beyond what I ever thought of. But then they go back to mundane life, and it's kind of crushing, because it's like they've seen something, but they don't know how to access it. And the key to that is devotion. The key to that is awakening the heart's natural love, offering it up, because then it grows organically. This is one of the aspects of kriya, the science of kriya, that is lovely and extraordinarily reassuring, because we learn to practice kriya not just as a technique, but as a devotional practice. Offer the energy up. Every kriya, we practice it faithfully, but we practice it lovingly. It's not enough to just follow the technique. We can practice any number of pranayams methodically and have wonderful results. I myself did this. And in college, I started doing yoga. I was doing 2 hours of hatha yoga in the morning before class. I mean, not always 2 hours right in a stretch, but I mean, when I had the time, when the class didn't start at 8 o'clock in the morning, or if I could get up early enough, I would do my 2 hours, and then I would finish with pranayam. By the end of those pranayams, I was in a state of meditation. I did not know the first meditation technique, zero. I knew nothing, but I was having that experience. But I didn't know how to support it with devotion. And today in the purification ceremony, I recommended something, and because we're going to do the Festival of Light shortly, I wanted to say, when you come up for the blessing in the festival, for those who do, and for those who are online, maybe you can focus first on the light and then focus briefly on Master. Just gaze into his eyes, because there is a light of wisdom. This is what the reading today is talking about. There is a light of wisdom that comes through those eyes. And when you look at them, and this is obviously something, you can only do it for a few moments or seconds or minutes here in the temple today, but you can do this at home anytime you want. If you take the book, Autobiography of a Yogi, if you don't have one, we'll give you one. Look at that picture on the cover and just look at his eyes. You will start to feel his consciousness. And his consciousness was no longer tied down to Paramhansa Yogananda, Mukunda Lal Ghosh, that separate person. He had expanded beyond that. He was way beyond that. He said the words, "I killed Yogananda long ago. No one dwells in this temple now but God." We can aspire to that and we can achieve that, but it starts with devotion. And so whatever practice you do, be it hatha yoga, be it prayer, be it meditation, be it any other spiritual practice, make sure devotion is central to that practice. And it will guide you organically, naturally, to rise and to support that rising, so that we don't come crashing back down afterwards. Because I can tell you from personal experience, it's no fun to crash back down. It's no fun to get stung by wasps. It's no fun to do lots of things that we have all had experience of. Rise on that wind. What is the difference between a bird and a stone? They are both capable of falling out of the air at maximum speed, terminal velocity. The bird has wings, and generally speaking, the bird knows how to use those wings. We too are designed to fly. Our souls are designed to rise in the divine light. We have to use the wings, and the wings are devotion. Let's flap them and rise into that divine light. Brother, I've a faint suspicion you and I've been led astray, taught to drive the devil from us. We've invited him to stay. What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness with a stick. No, we can't drive out the devil with a stick. Some of us proclaim all men are sinners, can't escape the devil's might. How their interest must intrigue him, they won't let him out of sight. What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness. Talk and sing, talk and sing. No, we can't drive out the devil. Talk and sing. Some of us were taught the slogan, social evils must be slain. But can anger drive out sorrow? How can passion conquer pain? What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness while we hate, while we hate. No, we can't drive out the devil while we hate. Brother, have you ever wondered why the darkness lingers on? If we want to see the sunrise, let us turn and face the dawn. What we need is light, for we only best the darkness when we love, when we love. Yes, we'll only best the devil when we